You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with the Chief Executive of Total Politics Group, Mark Wallace, and the New Statesman's Associate Political Editor, Rachel Cunliffe. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. Well, The Guardian leads with Baroness Mone's assertion that the Conservative government and the Cabinet Office were well aware of her links to a PPE company and the contracts that netted her family large amounts of cash during the COVID pandemic. The Eye says British passport holders can expect further delays at EU borders next year when fingerprint and facial scans are introduced. The Metro has the story of a convicted murderer who will be sentenced on Wednesday after an undercover police officer befriended him over the course of 2 years in order to bring him to justice. The Mail leads with a new report which says that NHS dental services are now at their most perilous point ever and need radical reform. The Telegraph looks ahead to guidance to schools being published tomorrow, which it says tells teachers to presume from the start that a child cannot change their gender. And we'll reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Mark Wallace and Rachel Cunliffe. Welcome to you both. Let's start with the Daily Record we're going to kick off with, and the story regarding Baroness Mone. Rishi Sunak coming out today and saying that there needs to be serious investigation into the matter. She said she doesn't know what he's talking about, and saying that basically the government knew all along what her involvement was. Rachel.
Yeah, there are a number of questions that have been raised by the eye-opening, I think, interview that Michelle Mone did with the BBC over the weekend. And one of the big questions is, what did the government know when? She claims that despite having initially told journalists, or her legal team told journalists in no uncertain terms, that she wasn't involved and actually threatened journalists trying to break the story, even though she did that, everyone knew. The Cabinet Office knew, the Department for Health knew, the NHS knew of her involvement. So, you know, what is the issue, essentially, is her defence. And obviously that raises some quite awkward questions for the government over, did they know? Obviously, Rishi Sunak was Chancellor at the time during the pandemic. And why weren't more checks done on not just her company or her husband's company, but on a number of companies that went through this VIP fast-track lane where there was a minister or an MP or someone in the House of Lords vouching for them? Very serious questions, awkward at this point when Rishi Sunak is obviously facing trouble on multiple fronts. But the Daily Record leading on a slightly different angle, which is people are understandably going, well, hang on, you made £60 million in profit from these contracts, a 30% profit on essentially life-saving protective equipment during a pandemic. Now, you know, you say you have nothing to hide. Some of it wasn't usable. Don't you think maybe in a cost of living crisis you should pay some of that money back to the taxpayer? I imagine Michelle Mone will see it a different way.
Mark?
Yeah, eye-opening's one word for it. It's quite a charitable word. Mind-boggling, jaw-dropping also spring to mind. I mean, the twists and turns in this pretty disgraceful saga, a growing number of people are thinking, pay it back. I suspect we'll hear yet more demands for that in Parliament, and understandably so. I mean, I think when these comments that she's come out with, saying that the government all knew, as Rachel says, how is this consistent with the idea that you know, this is public knowledge, everyone knew, everyone knew all the time, but I then decided, for some reason, to tell people the opposite, that actually just wasn't the case. It makes about as much sense as saying I wasn't trying to pull the wool over anybody's eyes while misleading people about what happened. I mean, I've been around politics and campaigns and so on for nigh on 20 years now. I've seen some people do some remarkable interviews over the times in some pretty sticky situations, but mind-boggling, eye-opening, jaw-dropping, just even why on earth that interview took place. Like, you watch the whole thing, it's completely bizarre, kind of Prince Andrew levels of bizarre. Why have you chosen to do this? Why are you doing this now? And why do you still seem so convinced and they've been so self-righteous about it?
Well, one of her lines is that herself and her husband had been scapegoated.
Well, I think there probably is something in the sense that this is the case that everyone is focusing on when it comes to dodgy COVID contracts and the fact that PPE in this VIP lane, we seem to have paid 80% more for it than PPE sourced from elsewhere, and questions about companies set up by people who have no healthcare experience or no experience in manufacturing these kinds of products who manage to get to the front of the queue, as it were. I think there are questions about a whole number of companies and how the scheme was operating, although we should remember that we were operating at a time of national crisis and no one really knew what they were doing, and there were desperate calls to get this PPE as quickly as possible. But she claims she's been scapegoated. She also claims that it's wrong to say that she and her family profited from this. And you're absolutely right that this interview, you find yourself asking, if you watch it, why on earth did you think it was a good idea to give this interview? And having decided to give this interview, why did you think it was a strong defence to say, well, I didn't profit, that money didn't go to me, it went to my husband who's sitting right next to me, and it's been put in a trust to which I and my children are the beneficiaries. So it's totally wrong to say that we're profiting from it, and to think that that is a persuasive argument that paints you in a sympathetic light. I mean, maybe rich people just have a completely different idea of, what is a lot of money and what constitutes sort of normal financial management. But I think to most people watching that, they'd go, no, that definitely looks like you're profiting from it to me.
I think you have to be going some for £60 million to not seem like a lot of money. And frankly, if that's not profiting, that's the kind of not-for-profit life I think we could all dream of, isn't it?
Or we have the wrong line of work.
Very possibly. But this idea, consequences and accountability is not scapegoating. Scapegoating is a completely different thing. The idea of an unjust blame being attached to try and excuse everyone else some kind of collective responsibility. This is about consequences, scrutiny and accountability. And, exactly as you say, it's important that we find out what went wrong and what went right in this country and other countries in response to the pandemic. Because, God forbid, there will be other crises. Now, frankly, a pandemic that simultaneously produced a spike in our need for PPE at the same time that it shut down the world's factories in the world's factory in China caused a huge shortage, and for understandable reasons, the UK government looked at a lot of different ways to try and unblock that, to frankly grab as much as it could. If people profited from disclosed or undisclosed personal links for stuff that wasn't usable, we need to know why. And people are going to be asking, as the Daily Record says, pay it back. Yes,
well, where's the money? And Rachel, she's spoken about the fact, as the Guardian's pointing to there, that government knew, everyone in government knew. She's named Michael Gove. Apparently there's a trail of emails that she can point to, which perhaps we might see, to prove that they did know exactly her involvement throughout.
Well, we know one institution that didn't know, and that was the House of Lords, because we know that she didn't declare her involvement through the House of Lords channel as she was meant to do, and her excuse for not doing that was that no one at the Cabinet Office told her that she needed to. So I don't think that absolves her in any way. But as I said, it's a difficult territory for Rishi Sunak, and obviously Michael Gove is in his cabinet, and Sunak has tried very hard to distance himself from the Boris Johnson era government and to put as much sort of space between him as possible and the COVID pandemic, because Partygate is really toxic for the Conservatives. The handling of the pandemic in general doesn't play particularly well, and this is a sort of reminder of his involvement in that at a time that he's trying really, really hard not to make that the thing that people are talking about. But I don't think it absolves Michelle Mone at all that Michael Gove may or may not have known, although we'd have to ask some questions about what exactly he did know.
I'm sure we'll be speaking about this story for a little while to come. Let's move on to another, Mark, and the FT, and this story about increasing rate of bankruptcies, soaring apparently.
Yes, both a very concerning economic story and a very serious, or will shortly be a very serious political story, I suspect. What they're looking at here is in a number of different countries, the rising rate of corporate insolvencies, particularly as in the US, in the EU, in the UK, a lot of the aid programmes that were put in place, firstly with COVID, and in some cases also with the energy crisis, of course, due to Russia's war on Ukraine, come to an end as those things time out, things that can't and could never last forever. a growing number of companies are failing, are winding up. And I suspect, in a political sense, this also plays into what people are thinking about in terms of the next 12 months politically. If you listen to the government, it's targeting improving growth, reducing inflation. They're there in Rishi Sunak's pledges. The difficulty is that you could do both of those things and still have a lot of people feeling a lot of pain. So, for example, if you think about households, yes, inflation is falling, so we may see interest rates coming down. But if you're somebody who's on a 2-year or 5-year mortgage fix that's coming to an end, your mortgage might be lower than it would have been a few months ago, but you're still going to be seeing a big increase, even though the government could start to achieve its goal. So politically, there's more pain to come down the line from real impacts in the economy.
Yeah, and Rachel, the stats here in England and Wales, insolvencies for the January to September period had also hit their highest level since 2009.
Yeah, so really this is a story that is a decade in the making. Obviously, as Mark said, a huge number of factors leading to this. I think the primary underlying ones was a decade of low interest rates across the world in the wake of the global financial crash, and there's this idea that there were zombie companies being kept alive by really cheap credit. So companies that really weren't profitable should have ceased to operate, but because credit was so cheap, were able to limp on. Now everything's hit at once. Interest rates are rising. Obviously, energy costs are going up. COVID support is down, and a lot of factors have made it much harder for businesses. So as well as the zombie companies that probably should have ceased trading a while ago, you've also got startups that are really necessary for growth that are really struggling in that environment as well. So you've got a sort of perfect storm where you're killing off some companies that shouldn't really exist now, but you're also killing off healthy companies that are really crucial to the next stage of growth, which is why it's so worrying.
And all the while, governments, of course, are bearing massive amounts of debt from having done that. To a certain extent, the COVID effect of this is the economic equivalent of what was pitched as a public health message, this idea of flattening the curve. So effectively, by government stepping in to prevent really mass redundancies, mass collapses of companies, mass destruction of value, jobs and employment in the teeth of the pandemic, that is going to be unwound at some point. Some companies got through that crisis and then recovered, but where there are others who are still have been effectively on life support, as that life support after the financial crisis in terms of permanent or meant to be emergency low interest rates that carried on arguably too long and has left us with this problem that's, what goes up must come down at some point.
Indeed. Mark and Rachel, thank you very much for the moment. We're going to take a break. Coming up, as the Pope permits blessings for unmarried and same-sex couples, is the Catholic Church becoming more progressive? We'll discuss that next. Do stay with us. I just want to bring you some breaking news. First off, the Icelandic Meteorological Office says a volcano has started erupting near the town of Grindavik. That's after weeks of earthquake activity. Authorities have evacuated nearly 4,000 inhabitants of the fishing town. So just to reiterate that breaking news, that volcano has erupted on southwest Iceland following weeks of earthquake activity in the area. We'll, of course, update you on information as soon as it comes into us. In the meantime, we are still here with our press preview. Joining me tonight, Mark Wallace and Rachel Cunliffe. And we're going to have a look at the I think, this story regarding the post-Brexit border, and British passport holders are going to face further checks and further delays. This is coming in from October next year. Rachel.
Fingerprints and facial scanning at airports when you enter the EU, which this is being sort of presented as if it's something that we should all be very annoyed about. And certainly I think a lot of people will be very annoyed about it, not least because it says that passport control times are expected to double for Brits who are visiting under the new system. I do think getting upset, 7 years after we've voted for Brexit, that there might be some border controls when we're putting in our own, or we have the option to put in our own border controls, is a little bit I mean, like, should we not have got used to this by now? But certainly more disruption. I think it's going to be quite similar to if you go to the US or basically any country that isn't Europe. It's quite normal to have to give biometric information, but I guess we've been very used to frictionless travel with the EU, which now we don't have, and apparently we're going to blame the Europeans for it.
And now we're used to seeing all these things through a Brexit lens. For UK travellers, as I understand, it's for non-EU travellers.
Oh, yeah, it's for everyone.
EU.
It's for everyone who isn't in the EU.
It would be nice if we could get away a little bit from thinking that everything's just, oh my God, you're picking on me. I don't think it's beyond, it should be beyond the wit of two of the world's most advanced economies to do a bit of pre-registration. I mean, that should be possible to have some kind of deal on that. But this isn't just, it's not just picking on us. We're not in. And so, we're non-EU travellers.
I mean, you say that, I've got an EU passport, so...
Congratulations.
Sucks to be you.
But there is a little bit of what Rachel's saying, that really it's to be expected and there's no point complaining now.
That's life, it's divergence. The fact is that people have different policies, they apply them in different ways. And
we're probably going to bring in something like this, I would imagine. If the EU is doing it and the US does it, I wouldn't be...
You've got to show your fingerprints, but the UK Border Force will just rap you on your fingers to tell you off for trying to come in. Yeah, that'll be how it's going to go.
Right, we're going to finish on the Guardian story, and this is the Pope approving a ruling that will allow priests to bless unmarried and same-sex couples, a significant change in position for the Catholic Church.
So they're not offering marriage and they're not offering any type of ritualisation or the impression of marriage, but priests will be allowed to bless same-sex couples and unmarried couples, which presumably includes couples where one or both parties are divorced, which obviously is also not sanctioned in the Catholic Church. And I think this is really positive. I mean, it's about 20, 30, 50 years too late, but anything that kind of reflects the way people actually live now, I think is probably to the Catholic Church's benefit if it wants to keep people on board. I think Mark disagrees with me here.
Well, I mean, happiness in the world's always a good thing, and I'm a libertarian. I'm a great believer in people living as they wish to live to maximise their happiness. Maybe I'm the wrong person. I was baptised a Methodist, and now I'm an atheist, so maybe I don't get this. But I kind of thought part of the point of a 2,000-year-old Catholic Church was meant to be that it kind of doesn't change. So I don't know, but I mean, it's for the Catholic Church to set its rules. If it's going to make people feel happier and more welcome within their faith and their life matching up, then good for them.
I mean, they did manage to be a bit flexible when Boris Johnson, who'd been divorced twice, got married in the Catholic Church.
Indeed, they managed to avoid kind of excommunicating the whole UK again. Yeah.
But do you think for those who maintain that the Catholic Church abides by certain rules, and that's the whole premise of the Catholic Church, so to change them means that you're changing the religion?
Well, the religion has changed. There have been updates to it over its 2,000-year-old history, and the Pope is meant to be, if you are Catholic, God's representative on earth, so what the Pope says goes, essentially.
That's pretty much the slogan. Yeah.
I'm Jewish, so I'm probably the wrong person to be discussing this as well. But I think it's a fudge, it's a compromise. It's not saying we're going to do same-sex marriage straight away, but it is recognising that people live in these ways and would like to have their relationships and have their faith and don't necessarily want to choose.
The Church modernising. Rachel and Mark, thank you very much. We'll see you in the next hour. Let's take a look at the weather for you now.